Which game should you play first? Valkyrie Profile or Valkyrie Profile 2 Sulmeria? A lot of people ask me this question, and I always have a difficult time trying to answer it. You see, it may seem like common sense to recommend the first game to start with in most cases, but with Valkyrie Profile, I'm really not sure about it. Now, you can of course start in any order you want to. I'm not trying to be one of those Legend of Heroes Trails fans who crucifies anyone who plays the games out of order, because that's stupid. All I'm trying to do is help people figure out which game is the best to start with. Now, the reason why it is so complicated of a question to answer is that while Valkyrie Profile and Valkyrie Profile 2 are completely different experiences that appear to be self-contained on the surface, they actually have a strong connection which ties them together. The thing is, trying to explain this connection would mean heavy spoilers. I already covered this in my analysis video on Valkyrie Profile 2, so be sure to watch that if you want to see the connection. The point is though, as individual games, both of them feel incomplete without the other, and therefore, if you are going to play any of these games, you are most definitely going to want to play the other one, if you give even the slightest bit of a damn about the story. The first Valkyrie Profile game takes place in the distant future. It follows the story of the Valkyrie named Lenneth, who is given a mission by Odin to gather the souls of the dead to Valhalla so that they can fight a war before Ragnarok happens. The game has a strong sense of urgency throughout as a result, since the world is on the brink of annihilation and you only have so many days to do your job before the world ends. Despite this, however, the story is practically non-existent for a sizable portion of the game. And what I mean by this is that the vast majority of this game is nothing more than padding and filler that does not connect to the second game whatsoever. There are numerous characters and antagonists that do not play a single role in the second game. However, there are also characters who play a very important role in the second game, and you are kind of expected to know about these characters beforehand. The thing is though, that if you want to start with the first Valkyrie Profile, you would actually end up spoiling the plot of Valkyrie Profile 2, because in the first Valkyrie Profile, you get to see one of the major scenes that occurs in the second Valkyrie Profile game beforehand, but from a completely different perspective. I can't really go into details for spoiler reasons, but if you started with the first game, it would really spoil that moment. There is also another plot twist that playing the first Valkyrie Profile beforehand would heavily spoil, and because of this, you may actually want to start out with the second game first, just so that you can experience these events without any prior knowledge, just to get the best experience you can. This comes with the detriment of getting confused during the events of Chapter 6 in Valkyrie Profile 2, as it directly connects to the events of the first Valkyrie Profile game and expects you to have experienced the events that occurred in that game. If you didn't play the first game, not only will you struggle to understand what is going on, but it is harder to appreciate the moment in the story, because all of the build-up for this climactic finale happens in the first Valkyrie Profile. In a way, Valkyrie Profile 2 is kinda like Halo 3 in the sense that you are finishing the fight, whereas Valkyrie Profile is the story leading up to that, like what Halo 2 is to 3, which explains all of the lore and backstory of the series, as well as giving you a crap ton of exposition dumps explaining everything. What makes Valkyrie Profile worth playing is not the gameplay, the story, or even the characters. Rather, the game's world building is the main attraction, and is the sole reason why you ever need to play the first game over the second game. Because the second game's world building is told in text via the Einherjar biography in the status screen, as well as talking to random NPCs. The thing is though, the world building of Valkyrie Profile 2 isn't really all that important in the grand scheme of things. It's just extra side bits of lore to further flesh out the world. The world building of the first Valkyrie Profile, on the other hand, is very important, as the entire story of Valkyrie Profile 2 revolves around the state of the world in the first Valkyrie Profile. You really have to experience all of the Einherjar stories to truly understand why the events that occur in the second Valkyrie Profile game are so meaningful. Now, it goes without saying that I consider Valkyrie Profile 2 to be the better game overall, and between the two, I find it to be the only game that can truly stand on its own for the most part. While the first Valkyrie Profile is excruciatingly difficult to get into without any prior investment into the series, this is because of how Valkyrie Profile tells its story and how monotonous its formula can be. You see, Valkyrie Profile isn't your typical JRPG experience. It is better described as being part visual novel, part dungeon crawler. The game's dungeons have little to no connection with the game's story progression, rather they exist solely to train up your Einherjar for them to be sent up to Asgard. Heck, you could skip the vast majority of the game's dungeons if you wanted to, since each and every single one of them is completely optional. The thing is though, if you want to get the A ending, then you will find it necessary to crawl through at least half of the game's dungeons. One dungeon in particular is completely mandatory if you want to get the A ending. You won't stand a chance in this dungeon, as the enemies will be too strong for you to beat, locking you out of ending A. Now what about ending B and C, you ask? Well, they're the game over screen in disguise. You see, the first Valkyrie Profile offers an illusion of freedom in regards to progression, but this is actually a puzzle for the player to solve, and a very cryptic one too. Failing to solve this puzzle gets you ending B, which essentially tells you that everything you have been doing for the past 36 hours has been a complete and utter waste of time. Now, the C ending is basically what you get if you decide to skip to the end of the world without doing anything whatsoever. Honestly, this ending is more worthwhile than the B ending, as it tells you exactly what the B ending tells you, but without wasting 36 hours of your life. So on your first playthrough, skip to the end of the world, get ending C, and enjoy the ending if you can. To get ending A, however, it's not quite that simple. I can't really explain how for spoiler reasons, but basically you need a guide to get you through the game, because without a guide, it is impossible to get the A ending unless you get really fucking lucky. And I mean really fucking lucky, because the game straight up doesn't give you any meaningful clue as to what you're supposed to do. There are certain things that can lock you out of ending A that are never explained to you, and you can accidentally lock yourself out of it at any time. Once you get ending A, you will realise that the entire story of the first Valkyrie Profile is in this very ending, and it's the most important part of the game, particularly if you plan on playing the second game. It's sort of a too little too late sort of deal, as by the time you reach ending A, the game is already nearly over, but the game explains everything to you at the last minute, and you realise that it is too late to do anything about it. This is where the second Valkyrie Profile game comes into play, as you are essentially finishing what the first Valkyrie Profile started, tying everything up for good. The thing is that Valkyrie Profile 2 takes place many years before the events of the first game, and right from the get-go, the player is told pretty much everything the first game reveals to you in its endings, and it does this in pure exposition just to keep newcomers up to speed. The thing is though, the game doesn't showcase all of the world building and characterization that the first game brought to the table. So while you fully understand what's going on in the world, you don't really care that much about what's going on because you haven't invested time into the world of the first Valkyrie Profile to become emotionally driven to accomplish the mission that Valkyrie Profile 2 presents you with. Hence the conundrum in regards to which game to start with first. Now if you want my honest opinion in regards to which way is the best way to start with the Valkyrie Profile series, this honestly depends on whether or not you plan on playing both games. If you are only going to play one of these games for whatever reason, you absolutely must start with Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria first, as between the two, it's the only game that I find can truly stand on its own. Sure, there are parts of the story that may be quite confusing near the end, and you may not fully be invested in its story, but who cares about that when the battle system is incredible, the visuals are stellar, and the music is absolutely sublime. Put simply, you're going to get some enjoyment out of this game one way or another, even if you walk away with it thinking that it's nothing special. The first Valkyrie Profile, on the other hand, is best described as an ordeal that you must be willing to suffer through in order to play. The only way you're going to be willing to suffer through it is if you are already a huge Valkyrie Profile fan. And the only way to be a Valkyrie Profile fan beforehand is to play either Valkyrie Profile 2 or Valkyrie Profile Covenant of the Plume beforehand, though I recommend 2 personally. Covenant of the Plume is kind of like a prequel to the first Valkyrie Profile, and does not connect in any way to the second Valkyrie Profile game. You can play it first if you like, or you can play it last, it doesn't matter, it is fully standalone, though if you played the first game beforehand, you may enjoy it a little bit more. So let's say you plan on playing both games, and already have both games readily available to you to play. Well, in this case, then I would actually suggest swapping between both games at certain points. I honestly feel that the only way to truly get the most out of these games is to play them both simultaneously, and you might find this to be quite daunting at first, but trust me, it is worth it. So the first thing you want to do is boot up Valkyrie Profile. Watch all the events at the start of the game, and once you get control of Lenneth on the world map, go into the menu screen and select Rest. Now rest for all of the days that are available to you. You will be sent to a sacred phase. Keep doing this until you see a scene with Lenneth and Freya. Once you see this scene, you know you are on the right track. Now keep doing this and eventually you will get ending C. Now stop playing the first Valkyrie Profile and boot up Valkyrie Profile 2. You will be playing Valkyrie Profile 2 for a sizable duration of the game, all the way up to the game's final dungeon, which is Chapter 6, which takes place entirely in the game's final dungeon. Once you reach this point, save at the save point, quit the game, and go back to the first Valkyrie Profile game. Now it's time for you to get the A ending. Bring up a strategy guide because you're going to need it. Eventually you will find a dungeon that has the exact same name as Valkyrie Profile 2's final dungeon. If you leave this dungeon at any moment, you will miss out on the A ending. There is also a scene that you have to view in the next chapter by doing a spiritual concentration that leads to Flensburg, and going to Flensburg. If you miss it, no A ending. You also have to send up an Einherjar named Lucian to Asgard before chapter 6. On top of this, there is another requirement which I cannot speak about for spoiler reasons, but the guide should tell you how to do this. Once you have done everything right, enter the Weeping Lily Meadow in chapter 8 and you will get the A ending. Now watch all the cutscenes, and after the credits roll, the screen will say Finn. Do not turn off the game just yet. Wait for the Finn to fade out, as a very important cutscene plays after the credits that directly ties into the events of chapter 6 in Valkyrie Profile 2. Now go back to Valkyrie Profile 2 and finish the game. This is, in my opinion, the best way to experience the story of both games. Now, if you don't want to go through the hassle of playing through the first game to understand the story, I recommend watching Climbing Partner's Let's Play of the game, or watching the cutscenes via YouTube instead. If you absolutely must play the first game before the second game, then bear in mind you will be spoiled, but then again, seeing as though most of us already played the first game beforehand, we were all spoiled anyways. Thing is though, Valkyrie Profile is not a game for everyone. Most people will play Valkyrie Profile expecting a masterpiece, only to be bitterly disappointed and aggravated, never wanting to play another Valkyrie Profile game ever again. I've encountered so many people who outright refused to play Valkyrie Profile 2 because of how much they hated the first game, even though Valkyrie Profile 2 has none of the issues that the first game had, and is a completely different experience. My goal is to prevent this by helping you choose the game that is easier to get into, and that is Valkyrie Profile 2 Sulmeria. Yes, I know that people are going to think that I'm biased, seeing as though Valkyrie Profile 2 is my favourite game of all time, but believe me, I'm not the only person who feels this way. A good friend of mine named Derek, whose YouTube channel goes by the name of TheCompletionist, also felt the same way about the first Valkyrie Profile when he played it. He put it down and didn't return to it until he played Valkyrie Profile 2 and fell in love with it. So much so that he went back to the first Valkyrie Profile to complete it, and enjoyed it so much more after playing 2. Now you know the best way to get into the Valkyrie Profile series, so if they interest you, give them a shot, see what you think, and if you played them, then you might like to see my spoiler videos on the games. If not, then oh well, at least you gave them a shot.